Hi, Easy here. Welcome to my Archmage Trickster build showcase for 3.10 Delirium. We'll start with an introduction, highlighting key concepts and mechanics of the build with an example gameplay in the background. We'll then move on to a general overview of the gems, gear, passive tree, leveling, and scaling options for endgame. We'll then conclude with a long rambling of my personal thought process throughout the creation of this build. This build uses the new Archmage support gem as a defining feature, giving us a way to convert our maximum mana into flat lightning damage to spells. This means that unlike most traditional builds, we can scale our damage by stacking mana for Archmage, and consequently our defenses through the usage of Mind Over Matter. The most obvious choice for Archmage has been a Stormbrand Hierophant, but I hope this build can convince you to try out our Trickster with literally any non-channeling spell you want by taking advantage of Orb of Storms and Tempest Shield. There are considerable downsides and restrictions to our Archmage playstyle, and we'll address all of these issues through some clever use of game mechanics. The gameplay of the build is input intensive, requiring smart use of all the skills at your arsenal. If one-button builds aren't that interesting for you, you'll have a great time taking full advantage of the various synergies built into the kit. If you're on the other side of the page, you'll often find the build to be tedious and weak, as it truly shines only when you combo your skills properly. As mentioned, the key feature of the build is the innate synergy between Archmage and mana stacking. Archmage will always cost a percentage of your unreserved mana pool and add extra lightning damage to your spells based on the mana cost. More mana directly equates to more damage. So unlike many builds that uses a single enduring mana flask to ignore mana issues, Archmage builds will have to actively manage mana as a resource throughout all stages of the game. This means that mana recovery is just as important as how much mana we have. When we start getting 6 links and increased mana cost items, our spells can cost well beyond what is reasonably recoverable through mana regen and flasks alone. The only spells that can truly take advantage of Archmage are duration spells, which allow you to prolong the added lightning damage for longer periods of time than a regular single cast. Stormbrand, as mentioned, is a popular choice, and most Stormbrand builds will complement the single target damage with Orb of Storms. Our build, on the other hand, will forego the branding playstyle and focus on Orb of Storms as our main single target spell, with regular spells such as Arc, Ball Lightning, Stormcall, and many other spells to supplement our clear. But as I mentioned, how are we going to recover enough mana to sustain spellcasts and maintain full benefit of Mind Over Matter? That's where our Ascendancy comes in. Trickster has a notable called Weave the Arcane. The most important line is the 20% chance to recover 10% of your maximum mana. While other mana recovery options such as Flasks and Clarity rely on flat regen, Weave the Arcane relies on maximum mana, allowing us to scale equally with our mana pool. The second key notable is Patient Reaper. Whenever you kill enemies affected by damage over time, such as a small tick of Ignite, we gain 70% recovery rate on mana, life, and energy shield. Not only that, we also gain percent maximum life, mana, and energy shield recovery on kill. The combination of these two Ascendancy notables gives us incredible sustain and recovery throughout all stages of our gearing process. With our Ascendancy taking care of our mana issues, we need to address the balance between damage and survivability. The previous video focused too much on damage and resulted in a glass cannon build that died too quickly during tough encounters. Instead of trying to spread ourselves too thin with stacking mana, damage, and survivability all at the same time, we opt to drop our damage as we're gaining damage through mana anyways. Although scaling both mana and damage will blow our scaling out of the water, enemies will blow us out of the water as well because we have 4k effective life pool. This brings us to Elemental Overload. Elemental Overload eliminates any form of crit scaling and instead gives us 40% more elemental damage. Moderate investment into crit and crit multi will always be better than Elemental Overload, but we do not have enough skill points and currency to support items that has enough survivability on top of the damage stats early in the league. By using Elemental Overload, we do lower our high-end damage but greatly increase our early and mid-game power with no investment, allowing us to focus on survivability. Speaking of which, we'll be making full use of brand new Cluster Jewels to aid our defenses. Outside of the usual life notables on our passive tree, we are supplementing several mana, life, and energy shield notables through the highly efficient Cluster Jewel chaining. We'll go into the details on which jewels we chose and why in the gearing section. On top of the Cluster Jewels, we can utilize Legion Jewels in the form of either Glancing Blows or Corrupted Soul to greatly increase our effective life pool if we have the currency. All in all, we have an incredibly well-rounded build that starts strong and finishes strong with worthwhile returns on investment. There are plenty of room for customization throughout the build, so feel free to explore your options just as I did with my version of an Archmage caster. With that out of the way, let's dive into the details starting with our skill gems. Our main 6th link is Orb of Storms. Orb of Storms has a secondary proc effect where if you use a quick casting lightning spell such as Tempest Shield, we can make up a pretty consistent single target DPS in an otherwise bursty Archmage build. Tempest Shield also allows us to recover our mana through Weave the Arcane, as it is the fastest casting spell in the game, giving us around 10 casts per second with faster casting alone. For more damage, we have a Wave of Conviction totem. We place these down for beefy rares and bosses to apply lightning exposure, granting us 25% lightning resistance penetration. For our 2 4-link spells, I decided to roll with Ball Lightning with GMP for one of them. Since Ball Lightning is a pseudo duration skill where it persists on the map for a short period of time, we can cast and move away, recovering our resources from enemies killed by Ball Lightning. I found this to be more comfortable than the instant damage from Arc, but whether you use either of those skills are completely up to you. You can slot in practically any spell in these 4 links as long as they can be supported by Archmage. I also supplement our single target DPS with Vow Stormcall. Archmage has a strange interaction with Vow skills where it gives mana cost to a normally free Vow skill. This means that we can use Vow Stormcall, for example, with the same Archmage steroid as any other regular spell. I personally enjoy using Stormcall quite a bit and always find a way to work it into my builds every league. For our last 4 link, we have an Arcane Cloak and Flame Dash setup. The increased duration and second wind helps greatly with the Arcane Cloak's uptime, which in turn improves our damage and survivability. Flame Dash also benefits greatly from second wind. The last free gem slot can be anything you want. I personally have a Portal Gem linked to faster casting and Tempest Shield to save on Portal Scrolls, but you could easily put in a Golem or something else for more utility. Let's take a look at our gear next. I'm using my current gear only as an example. It does not represent a complete endgame setup, but a guideline for those who are looking to try out the build. I'll be making several endgame recommendations for those who want to min-max to the fullest. For those of you starting this build with little to no currency, much like I did, you can substitute any unique with the rare, with mana, life, and resistances. The base doesn't matter that much, but I prefer energy shield bases as we do not scale armor or evasion to any extent. If you can find a well-rolled item on the wrong base for a bargain, feel free to pick it up. Mana and links alone gives us so much damage that you'll have enough currency for most of the cheap uniques by the time your damage starts to fall off. Keep in mind that we are ignoring crit mods as we are an elemental overload build. If you want to scale your damage even further with more currency, you can drop elemental overload and start scaling crit with crit multi and crit chance on your gear as well. We'll start with our weapon. You should aim to get a wand or a scepter, but a cheap well-rolled dagger is serviceable as well. As for the mods, we get so much added flat lightning damage to our spells from Archmage that any added damage to spell prefixes are relatively weak. You want to look for high spell/lightning damage and mana for prefixes, as well as cast speed with lightning penetration or damage added as extra chaos mods for suffixes. Ideally, you want to have an open suffix for a double damage while focused craft. Our shield serves as a purely defensive slot. We want high life and mana for our prefixes and resistances and strength/dex for our suffixes. Once again, an open suffix is ideal for the double damage while focus craft. For our helm, we want to use Crown of the Inward Eye. It drops from Cyrus at a high rate and markets for a couple Chaos and Trade League. Even if you're solo self-found, you'll run across few too many of these during your Cyrus encounters. We benefit greatly from every single one of the mods, so try to get a high roll on life, mana, and global energy shield mod. I personally bought my 19% for 20 chaos, whereas a 9% goes for around 3 chaos. It's basically paying 17 chaos for 11% life, mana, and energy shield, which is well worth the investment. On top of these defensive mods, we also get all 3 transfigurations. They provide more life, mana, and energy shield, and gives us a percentage of our increased life, mana, and energy shield as increased damage. We stack so much of these resources that it's hard to beat this helm in both damage and defense. If you can't afford the helm yet, aim for a rare with life, mana for prefix, and resistances, attributes for suffix. If you're rich enough for an enchant, I'll personally recommend all of the Arcane Cloak enchantments, especially the Life Regen enchantment. It gives Arcane Cloak Life Regen when you use it, and basically turns it into a life flask with a short cooldown that also happens to provide a ton of added lightning damage and a fat shield. You could even drop your life flask with the Corrupted Blood Immunity Jewel if you want and go for a more offensive flask. You can also use Reduced Stormcall Duration or Extra Proj and Ball Lightning. Any of the spell that you use, you can find an appropriate enchantment, but they aren't as game changing as the Arcane Cloak enchantments. For our body armor, we're using Cloak of Defiance. It's fairly pricey due to the popularity of mana stacking builds, but it is by no means necessary from the start. A 5-link rare will provide more damage to Orb of Storms than a 4-link cloak. The main benefit of using this cloak is the ability to not path for Mind Over Matter and the 10% extra Mind Over Matter modifier. It also gives us tons of mana and a respectable amount of energy shield from Trickster's Escape Artist Ascendancy. If you want to push your build to the limit, a rare Carnal Armor, like the one shown here, will be significantly more damage while retaining the core defense from the cloak. For gloves, there's no other glove that will bring more damage than a Voidbringer. The gloves are so cheap and common that it's hard not to recommend them. Aim for 75% plus on the increased mana mod, and since they're unique, it is relatively cheap to get elemental weakness on hit Corruption. For boots, a simple rare with movement speed, life, mana, and resistances will work just fine. Either Elusive or Tailwind for the rich, and both for the crazy. Two-tone boots are also worth considering if you're min-maxing your build and can't find resistances elsewhere. For rings, get rares with high life, mana, resistances, and strength/dex. There are mana temple mods that are quite common and cheap. A special note here is that you can often find conductivity on hit Crusader rings for less than 5 chaos. If you can fill out your attributes and resistances elsewhere, these curse on hit rings are far more affordable than corrupted gloves. For amulets, get rares with high life, mana, and resistances. Much like the ring, the temple mod comes with high flat mana as well as an increased maximum mana mod, so try to see if you can snag one for cheap like I did. For belt, use the Stygian Bias with, who would have guessed, high life, mana, and resistances, as well as strength/dex. The Abyss Jewel that goes into your belt is particularly important as it will need added fire damage to spells to proc damage over time requirement of Patient Reaper. The added fire damage is mandatory. Outside of that, the Abyss Jewel should also have either life, mana, or both, along with the fire damage, and a cold damage for chills or onslaught on kill for clear speed. For flask, I'm using a quartz flask, mana flask, life flask, and a quicksilver with room for one unique flask. A triple balanced Wise Oak is the best option in my case, but Cinder Swallow Urn is better for mapping. A quartz flask can be swapped out for any other utility flask such as a sulfur flask. Although the mana flask can feel pointless at times with how much recovery we have, the extra security of being able to recover mana while moving around makes bossing much more comfortable. You want Curse, Freeze, and Bleed immunity on your flasks. Jewels are a bit spicy. Let's start with the boring one, Fever Mind. You can stack these as much as you want, but they'll slowly increase your mana cost to the point where you exceed your maximum mana. I don't recommend going over 50% of your maximum mana on your 6-link mana cost, as it hinders your Mind Over Matter cushion and makes the build feel clunky due to having to recover mana more often through Tempest Shield. Cluster Jewels, on the other hand, are one of my favorite additions to the game, and I highly recommend running them in literally every single build. They can help define your build or help fill in gaps that you might be missing. I won't go into too much detail on the Cluster Jewel system in this video, but I will list out several notables that I recommend and the ones that I'm running currently. For our large Cluster Jewel, Supercharge is the single strongest notable that you can get for a lightning based elemental overload build. It makes your lightning damage lucky. It is insanely good. Doriani's Lesson is also fantastic as well. It gives us elemental life leech, which helps us sustain through damage during tough encounters. You can get both Supercharge and Doriani's Lesson on the same lightning damage jewel, but getting both as well as a double socket is quite rare and expensive. Since we're running two large jewels and don't really have any other better notables to go for, we don't lose that much from running a Supercharge with 2 sockets and a Doriani's with 2 sockets. For medium jewels, there aren't many options that are good for us. I personally opted to not use them to save on passive points. There is one exception, however. Master of Fear unnerves enemies, giving us 10% more damage to cursed enemies. Since we can get conductivity on hit relatively cheaply, these provide fantastic damage boosts for its cost. Our small jewels are the most interesting. I am personally running Enduring Composure for endurance charges, Scintillating Idea for lightning penetration and mana, Holistic Health for life and mana, and Ancient Wool for maximum energy shield. There are other interesting cluster notables, but these are the ones that I have been using personally. Now before we get into the passive tree, let's go over our Pantheon and Bandits. For the Pantheon, I chose Lunaris for clear speed and Shakari for the poison immunity, swapping out Shakari for life flask regeneration for longer boss encounters. For Bandits, we kill all of them for the juicy passive skill points. I currently run Alira on my character as I haven't had the chance to switch it, and the extra resistances are actually helping me cap out my resistances. For our passive tree, we want to start out in the shadow area, getting life and damage whenever you can. I tend to alternate them, as in I get damage one time, and then aim for life next, and then damage again, and then back to life. But it usually doesn't really work out that way all the time, but it's a good guideline to have. So you want to aim for Elemental Overload as soon as possible. Once you get Elemental Overload, you should be at a point where you can get your first Ascendancy done. With the first Ascendancy, get Weave the Arcane, at which point you can start using Archmage support. After you get Archmage support, you can start getting these maximum mana nodes and travel up here to get more life and mana. And around this point, you should be comfortable enough to get Mind Over Matter. Make sure you have a mana flask to sustain your mana. Afterwards, we want to grab life nodes over here, as well as the Arcane Capacitor for extra Arcane Surge and mana. Even before this though, you can go ahead and grab these Cluster Jewel sockets if you have Cluster Jewels. And Cluster Jewels are only just a couple chaos for the entry level jewels, so feel free to look them up on PoE Trade if you're in Trade League, and try to get some good ones for a very cheap price. It's only when you start going for those lower passive jewels with really good notables, as well as 2 jewel sockets, where they start to get really expensive. As you can see, this leveling tree is very similar to our endgame tree, so there isn't too many respecting to be done. The only main difference is the fact that we drop Mind Over Matter here for Cloak of Defiance. For your Ascendancy, you want to go for Weave the Arcane as mentioned, and then Patient Reaper, Ghost Dance, and then Escape Artist. For our gameplay showcase, we're going to dive straight into Path of Exile. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, we have a lot of buttons that we have to press. We have a lot of skills, and it even bleeds into the secondary hotbar, although it's just Focus and Portal, so it's not used too often. The main deal with having these many skills is the fact that you have to use them in a very smart way. A lot of one-button builds will just run and press, Tornado Shot or whatever it may be, but with our build, there is a purpose for each of the skills. So Orb of Storms obviously is used for single target, along with Tempest Shield to regenerate our mana. So if you have no mana, we just spam Tempest Shield, and if you get decent procs, we recover all of our mana. Orb of Storm is also helpful for supplementing Clear sometimes. And for our main Clear skill, we use Ball Lightning. You can slot in an Arc or anything else you want, but I like Ball Lightning. And then we also have something called Arcane Cloak, and I didn't talk too much about it yet, but Arcane Cloak is probably one of the strongest skills that they introduced this patch. So Arcane Cloak will sacrifice your mana, give you a nice fat shield, and it increases your damage done as it adds lightning damage. So if you look at the damage of our Orb of Storms, it's 77k. If you use Arcane Cloak, it is now 91k. That's almost 130k extra damage, which isn't anything to laugh at. So with that in mind, how do we go about playing this build? Well, it's rather simple when it comes to the clear. Press your buttons, add in Ball Lightning, and just continue to run forward. How did I miss that? Just continue to run forward. As you can see, if you spend all of our mana, when we run, our mana will recover as we get kills with Ball Lightning, as I mentioned in the, earlier in the skill gem section. So it's hugely beneficial for the playstyle, as you can Arcane Cloak at any point and still have enough mana to cast another Ball Lightning. We also have Unleash in our setup, because Unleash benefits from Archmage as well. So all that added lightning damage gets added onto each of the Unleash effect without having the additional mana cost. So it's extremely strong for any spell that is unleashed. For single target situations, there's a lot of key shift to press in the sequence. So you want to put down your totems for the lightning penetration. You want to put down your arcane orb, not arcane orb, orb of storms for the arcane surge, and then you want to put down, you want to flame dash at one point or another, use focus, use arcane cloak, and then start using storm call, and then spam tempest shield. I know this by muscle memory. It's hard to explain when I'm actually trying to say every single one of the skill names. But doing that in that sequence will greatly improve your damage output, as you're stacking a lot of damage buffs onto that small burst window. And it might, if you don't kill them, then you can run around and wait for your next time that you have Foul Stormcall or your focus back up, and it provides good damage burst windows, which helps with the general playstyle, the survivable playstyle that you have, where you deal damage in a short amount of time and then run away, dodge, and make sure you're staying alive for that encounter. So congratulations if you got this far into the video. I really appreciate you guys watching all the way till here. From this point on, I'll be discussing some of the endgame options as well as a lot of detailed stuff that I didn't want to have to edit. So from now on, we'll be doing a lot of ummings and free speech, but hopefully you guys will understand as we go into some details about what you can do to improve the build and what I've done personally to improve the build as well. So the first thing that I want to go over is the Legion Jewel. So I finally got to afford this for about 2.5 exalts. And this one specifically is the Doriani, Corrupted Soul. So if you look at my life pool, we currently have 4,200 life and 4,200 energy shield. And whenever we do take damage, half of it comes into our energy shield, half of it comes into our health, our life pool. And the reason why this matters and why this is even good in the first place is normally you would want to buffer all of your damage into your energy shield. But in our case, we have so much recovery that comes from our ascendancy and our leech and everything else that it's actually more beneficial for us to split the damage between life and energy shield, as we can gain the benefit of mind over matter on all hits, not just the hits that come into our life after our energy shield has depleted. This means that we're inherently more tanky and we have a lot smoother damage intake than we otherwise would have had. Not only that, we also get 20% of our maximum life as energy shield, which is fantastic for, our build. Another thing to note is we are triple balancing Wise Oak. So if you see this crappy jewel, that's because we managed to roll 12% fire resistance when our resistances were already perfectly balanced. So I had to get 12 resistance for cold and lightning as well on something random. So that's where we're sitting at right now. I also grabbed this notable right here for that 7% chance to blind enemies, which also increases our survivability by making attacks have 50% chance to hit us when we do blind them, which should be almost always since Orb of Storms hits so quickly. As for an endgame setup, I think this is a pretty much this current setup is as far as you're gonna get with Elemental Overload. After this point, you'll have to drop Elemental Overload and start going to crit in order to scale your damage further. So you would drop these travel nodes, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then go up here instead. So 1, 2, 3. Use those 2 passive skills on things like Doomcast, if you can afford it, Arcane Potency, and then you want to start getting items that give you spell crit chance, since Orb of Storms naturally only has 5% chance to crit. 5% chance to crit, and Ball Lightning as well has a pretty low chance to crit as well, 5% chance. Stormcall as well has 5%, or so Stormcall 6%. But yeah, that's 5% is really hard to scale off of, which is why you want to get maybe Corruption Gloves. Maybe you get a double corrupted elemental weakness with spell damage or spell crit chance, and the chest that I mentioned, which has mind over matter effect from a Shaper mod, as well as a spell crit chance as well, and an Arcane Surge if you can afford it, but that thing's rare, so maybe just a spell crit chance, that alone will give you a lot of damage. And rings you can put on crit, same thing for shield, you can put on crit chance for spells, and since we're going for crit, you can put on crit multi as your suffix on your weapon, as well as crit chance for spells on your prefix, I believe. So there are ways for you to increase your damage output outside of going for Elemental Overload. Once again, we are going for Elemental Overload for the purpose of increasing our survivability, which this build does amazingly. Whenever I run maps, I rarely die unless it's to some really strong mobs, to the Delirium uniques that I didn't really pay attention to, any of the big bosses from Beyond, like those guys, which always give trouble to every single build, are the only ones that I really have issues with. Any of the regular bosses, such as the Conqueror bosses, I have no problem even face tanking for a lot of cases. And once I get the poison immunity, even the poison guy will no longer be an issue. As for the cluster jewels, there's a lot of potential to min-max these things, but the point of min-maxing is to get extra passive skills. So this jewel right here has 9, it adds 9 passive skills. This one over here adds 9 passive skills. I could easily get 8 passive skill version for way more currency with supercharge and with Doriani's. And there's also other notables such as I believe Prismatic Heart gives us resistances, which you need currently, but if you have enough gear, you'll have enough resistances, so you don't need this. But there's also one I believe called Zadis, where it gives you almost 60% increased damage off of a single notable, which is huge. As well as if you're going for crit chance, medium socket jewels suddenly become really good, as you can get some really good crit and crit multi notables on those crit jewels. And you know, just typical small nodes are really good for survivability as well. So there's a lot of improvements you can make, but the key point is that if you're not meeting the passive, the number of passive point breakpoint with your current cluster jewel, you don't actually gain anything by, you don't gain anything substantial by decreasing or spending more money on an 8 passive jewel or something like that. Like right now, I wouldn't gain too much from getting 8 passive jewels versus what I have currently, because if you're not at the level where you can, like if you're missing 1 or 2 skill points to get another huge notable, right? Then yes, you definitely want to get an 8 passive skill node. But if you're at a point where you're perfect and you're not gonna get anything for another couple levels, then you can settle with what you have, which is a pretty dynamic balance, as you're gonna continually level as you progress your character. Outside of crit scaling, our damage output can be improved even more with even more currency by going an Ivory Tower build. If you guys don't know Ivory Tower, let me try to pull up my PoB where I have made this version. Ivory Tower gives you mana. Sorry, it gives you energy shield for reserving your life. And we have it gives us energy shield for reserving life. We have a lot of energy shield from these guys, Will Shapers. So if right now, as you can see, I have 7,000 energy shield with a pretty janky setup. If I swap out all of my cluster jewels for the Ivory Will of, I don't know what it's called, where are you? Will Shaper jewels, so Chimeric Essence. If I swap out all of these for Chimeric Essence, well, actually I need to unslot them because it doesn't like it if I do this way. Like it really doesn't like it. I think it breaks. If I go in here and take all of these out, that's not Chimeric Essence. Okay, so that's all of them gone. Yep, all of them gone. And then we slot in Chimeric Essence for every single one. We go from 7,000 to 8,300. That's 1,300, almost 1,400 energy shield from what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 6 or 8 passive skills. That's huge. And the craziest part about this is that it scales off of our mana, because these are gain extra mana energy shield based on your maximum mana. So I could easily see someone going a route with Ivory Tower, allowing you to reserve things like Wrath, Zealotry, and Discipline or even Herald of Ice if you want to drop discipline. You don't care about your energy shield total too much. And having both Wrath, Zealotry, and something like Herald and / Discipline, and having that amount of extra damage along with crit scaling and everything else that comes with it, Pain Attunement, etc., etc. Like, there's a lot that can happen with this setup, and I'm really excited to see what other people will do to truly explore the potential of Archmage, especially a Trickster variant. Is it better or worse than a Stormbrand? It's probably worse in all reality because of how strong Stormbrand is as a mechanic, and being able to scale your damage almost as much as you want on a really good mechanic skill is really hard to beat. But overall, I think this is a pretty good way for someone to spend their currency, because it's just a really cool way to take advantage of the tools that you're given. I don't think I've seen any Ivory Tower build yet, and I think this could be the first one that really shines, as before people would suffer from not having enough damage because they had to stack mana to make sure they're not going to die from chaos damage, while having enough energy shield and energy shield scaling and etc, etc. Whereas right now we have a way to scale damage off of that huge mana pool, which is amazing. So there's a lot that you can do. I personally chose to end it here with Elemental Overload and a nice glorious Vanity Jewel, just in case I want to come back to this character, and like 5,000 mana. You could easily push this up as much as you want by sacrificing survivability or anything else elsewhere. But I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I hope you guys had a good time on this journey of trying to understand every moving piece that we have to put together to make this build a reality. I hope you guys enjoyed this long video, and I hope the extra effort that I put into the editing has been fruitful. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll come back with more videos, more discussion videos, more effortly created build videos like this one, and other content updates as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.